Topping and becoming a well-respected hi-fi brand and have a small but growing number of followers in the audiophile community. They're quite widely regarded as some of the best hi-fi gear to come out of China in recent years. Particularly, they've had some great success with their lineup of well-performing, affordable DACs, and the E30 is one of their newest DACs, coming in at around about $100. This is a price point that is becoming fiercely competitive in recent years, especially with the Shipmode E3 and now the arrival of the JDS Atom DAC. Topping are known for their excellent price to performance, so have they nailed it with the E30? Well, let's get into it. Hey guys, this is Noel and this is Wheezy Reviews. Each week I take a look at something audio related and let you know what I think, so if you're into that kind of thing, then make sure you subscribe. First up, let's just take a look at what's in the box. It's actually a fairly plain packaging, just says topping on it, tpdz.net. It is quite nicely packaged actually. You've got a nice dense soft foam, which is good. So obviously you have the topping E30 itself, along with a USB-A to USB-B cable. There's a DC power cable that has a barrel connector at one end that connects to the DAC, and a USB-A connector at the other end. This is because the E30 can be powered off of any USB charger providing 5 volts and 1 amp. Also included is a remote control, which is kind of useful. We'll go into that a bit more in a bit, but it's really interesting to see that you get a remote control, especially for this price point. So the topping E30 itself is this really nice compact metal chassis that has a glass front panel. At least I think this is glass and not plastic, which also features a touch control here. So you might be able to see this on the camera. There's a button there that says it's a power symbol and it says cell on it for select. That's actually a touchpad that you just push. Just to the left of that symbol, you can see the IR receiver for your remote control. Taking a look at the rear, we've got RCA output, so stereo RCA outputs. You've got a coaxial SPDIF input, an optical SPDIF input, so Toslink input. You've also got a USB-B connector, and you've got your barrel connector for your power, and that's basically it. It's good to see that we've got coaxial and Toslink inputs there. As you can see, I'm using the optical connection to my computer, and actually that was the main reason why I bought this one, was because I wanted an optical connected DAC for full galvanic isolation from my PC. So I've been using the topping E30 connected up to my JDS Atom headphone amp, and this is nice and compact and sits on top of the amp quite nicely. So before I go through the actual features of the DAC itself, let's just talk about the specifications. So the E30 supports PCM audio up to 32-bit and up to 768 kilohertz over USB, as well as DSD 512 over USB. Now, over optical or coaxial input, the E30 supports up to 24-bit audio and up to 192 kilohertz. From what I've seen, and actually included in the documentation, they've provided a bunch of measurements as well. This does measure incredibly well. The DAC chip in use is the AK4493 EQ, I think it is, which is actually a little step up from the one that's used in the Shipmode E3 and the JDS Atom DAC. Not that it would matter all that much, but for those specs nerds who want the latest and greatest, here it is. And again, for those nerds, you're looking at an AKM AK4118 SPDIF receiver for your optical and coaxial inputs. Again, that's a higher model chip than the one on the Mode E3, if that even matters at all. And for those nerds using the USB, the E30 uses XMOS XU208, and that's the same as on the JDS Atom DAC. Right, so let's go over the feature set then, and look at all the different options that you've got to configure this. I must admit, I did have to read the manual quite a lot for this DAC, because it has quite a few different features, and the menu itself isn't quite the most intuitive. I can't believe I actually have to read the manual just to figure out the controls of this. But E30 has a standby feature where it will have a little orange dot just to remind you that it's there, it's on standby. So you just tap the power button and that turns it on. To put it back to standby, you just hold that for a second or two. So when you first power it on, it's going to be in preamp mode, and it's going to show you your volume. This here is just showing me that it's at 0 dB, which is its maximum volume. And then with the remote control, you can change the volume, and you can just change it down in 0.5 of a dB steps. And this will go all the way down to, I think, minus 99. Yeah, minus 99 dB. Now, when it is in preamplifier mode, you're only ever going to see the volume there. So if you are using it as a DAC with a headphone amp, then you're just going to see the volume, and that's it. There is a way to switch this to DAC mode, and I'll show you that in a minute. But in its default operation, in preamplifier mode, this is where you get to see the volume. Now, this is going to be really useful for people who want to use this connected up to a pair of speakers. So you can just buy this, $100, connect it up to a pair of powered speakers, and just use this to drive the whole lot. So it's got your DAC and your preamp all in one with a remote control. Perfect for people who want to set up a little system with powered speakers and use it with a remote control. Speaking of this remote control, obviously you have a power button on it, so you can turn the DAC on and off. There's a little bit of a delay after you turn it back on again when it turns itself back on. You've also got a mute button, so when it's muted, you've got just 3 dashes there on the screen. You can also use the arrows here to cycle through the inputs. So you can see at the top there we have USB, coax, opt, and back to USB. Because there's no USB connected, it just shows error for error. Same goes for the coax. There's no coax connected, so it just says error. But when I go back to optical, it shows that it's on 192 kilohertz PCM, which is what I've got the optical output set to. It's its maximum set. On the remote control, you have a thing that looks like a pair of headphones. That doesn't seem to do anything. You've also got a line out button, which again doesn't seem to do anything. The M button doesn't do anything either. The fur button actually allows you to cycle through different fur filters. It actually has 6 different fur filter settings. So sharp roll-off filter, slow roll-off filter, short delay, sharp roll-off filter, which is your default, which is F3. We also have short delay, slow roll-off filter, super slow roll-off filter, and low dispersion short delay filter. I'm sure that this is going to make sense to some people. Me, I haven't really gotten into the whole tweaking of filters and things like that. Maybe it's something I'll do in the future, but you can just cycle through it. And if you don't know what they are, this is why I say you kind of need to have the manual around all the time. Because all you get is F1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You're going to need to know them from the manual. Default is F3, so I'm just going to put it back to that. Auto, the auto button on the remote, allows you to select between 2 different auto off or auto standby settings. And it says A0 and AC. So A0, I think, allows it to go to standby if it doesn't receive a signal from one of its inputs for a minute. It will then turn off. And when I say turn off, it will go to standby. Some people don't want their DACs to turn off. Okay, fair enough. But as long as it's on optical, for example, and I'd imagine the same with USB. I haven't used it on USB. But on optical, at least, as long as it's receiving that optical signal from the PC, it's going to be on. So when I turn my computer off at night, the signal stops, obviously, and then the DAC will turn itself off after a minute, which is good. So when I turn the computer back on in the morning, this will turn itself back on automatically. No big deal. What do the instructions say? Okay, so A0 is on. So O for on, or 0 for on, AO for on, and AC for off. So when it's on, that means that after a minute, it will go to standby. When it's off, it means it won't ever go to standby. And next on the remote, that button there is a brightness button. Allows you to select 3 different brightness settings on the screen. I just leave it on the medium one, L2. Let's set this to DAC mode, which is what I think most people are going to use it as anyway. So I've been using this as a DAC connected up to my JDS Atom headphone amp. So to do that, I'm just going to turn the... Okay. All right. So this is a little bit annoying as well. So this touch control, one tap will allow you to cycle through the inputs. And to turn it off, you need to hold it. Turn it back on, you just one tap it. And I keep hitting it once to turn it off, and I end up cycling through each of the inputs. But I need to hold it to turn it off. Now, to change it to DAC mode instead of preamplifier mode, I need to hold the select button for around 3 seconds, and that will show that it's on pre. But in order to change it to the DAC mode, I need to hold it for 3 seconds, wait for it to say pre, then hold it for another second, then it'll go to DAC, and then it'll let go. So now it's in DAC mode. So if I turn this on now it's showing that I'm on the optical input at 192 kilohertz PCM, and it's going to stay on that. So I think the mute button still works. Yeah, the mute still works. The power still works. But obviously the volume doesn't do anything anymore. You can still cycle through the inputs with the remote control. But I think at this point, because you're using this as a DAC with a headphone amp, I think at this point the remote control becomes a bit superfluous. The annoying thing is that you cannot change the screen brightness or the auto on-off settings or the fur filters without the remote control. So you do still need to have this nearby with some batteries in it if you want to change these other settings. You can't do it on the device itself, which is a bit annoying. So anyway, if you need to make any changes to the settings, you need to keep the remote around. On DAC mode, this is just your basic DAC. It does not going to act as a preamplifier anymore, and you're always going to see the current sample rate. But when you're listening to Tidal or Amazon Music or something like that, and you can set the player to use exclusive mode, then this is going to be able to change the sample rate on the device for you. So if you're listening to a 44.1 kilohertz song, it's going to show you 44.1 on the screen. If you're listening to something at 48 kilohertz, it's going to show you that, or 96, it's going to show you that, which is pretty cool. So I suppose we really need to talk about sound, and as I've mentioned when I've reviewed other source gear so far, I don't think that this has a sound per se. It sounds like a DAC to me, but I also don't have any kind of A/B switcher or anything like that. It's possible that there is a certain sound characteristic that any DAC or amp has, but whether you can actually tell that without some kind of A/B testing is a whole nother thing. I know that Max did a review of this the other day, and he said he could hear a difference between the Topping E30 and the Ship Magni 3, or Modi 3, sorry, the Ship Modi 3. But how he had it, the Modi 3 and both the Topping E30 are both optical input DACs, and he had a device that allowed basically a splitter from another DAC, which allows him to output the same optical signal to two different DACs, but connect both of those up to the same headphone amp with a multiple input headphone amp, and then switch between the two. So you can literally just sit there and switch backwards and forwards between the two of them and listen for the slightest little difference. Because I don't have any other optical DAC, I can't do that. So I have the JDS Atom DAC, and I have the S-DAC in my O2 amp. The Topping E30 is an optical input DAC. The JDS Atom DAC and the S-DAC that's in my O2, they're both USB. So if I have the Atom DAC connected to the Atom amp and I have the Topping E30 connected to the Atom amp, it can take two, it can switch between the two, but I would still need to switch the audio device on the computer, then push the switch on the amp to switch between the two DACs, and then continue to listen. By the time I've done that, I can't hear a difference. It's possible if I could switch instantly back and forwards between the two, I could hear a difference, but the very fact that I would need to go to that length, that extreme length to hear a difference, I think suggests that the difference is irrelevant to most people. It doesn't mean that there isn't a difference. It just means that by the time I've messed about switching between the two of them, I can't hear it. If a certain amp or DAC or whatever has an audible character, then yeah, it might be more easy to tell the difference. You know, it's one thing to take a pair of headphones off and unplug and replug and put another pair of headphones on and hear an obvious difference, because the difference between one headphone and the other is vastly bigger than the difference between one DAC and the other. Even the difference between one amp and the other, assuming that the amp is aiming for some kind of transparent reproduction of the sound. As far as I'm concerned, the audible difference between this DAC and any other DAC that I've ever heard is negligible, if anything at all. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a difference and that you couldn't hear it if you did some kind of A/B testing with a switch or whatever. Like I said, Max did test his the other day alongside a Ship Modi 3, and he could hear a difference. He is able to do that with a switcher, and I currently am not It's something that I might be able to investigate doing in the future, but for now, it's not a setup that I have. And the fact that I can switch the playback device from one to the other on the computer, then switch the inputs on the amp and then not hear a difference, even if there is an audible difference, not be able to hear it after switching it, after I've stopped listening for a few seconds, it's basically irrelevant at that point. Anyway, I think this has become a bit of a rant, and I'm probably not very coherent, and I've probably made my life much more difficult when it comes to doing the editing. So I'm just going to leave it like that. So going back to the topping E30, I think for my own personal use, this is a much better DAC than the JDS Labs Atom DAC, because it has an optical input and a coaxial input. That in itself is enough for me to say that this is a better DAC for the money. I mean, they're both about $100. This one's made of metal, has a little screen on it, has optical and coaxial inputs. The Atom is a plastic box that has USB input, and that's it. And as I said, I don't notice any audible difference between them. So as far as I'm concerned, the topping has the Atom DAC beat, and it is my new DAC to go along with my Atom amp. But obviously you've got the ship Mode E3, and that could well be, I mean, that has an optical and coaxial input as well. So I think that one actually is a match, especially as it's got a nice metal chassis as well. It is actually a match for the topping E30. Apart from the one thing where the topping E30 has that remote control and that preamplifier feature. So if you are going to be using it to run a pair of powered speakers, then this is probably, this might be one of the only cheap DACs that are out there that actually has this feature. I've not seen any others around that have a remote control at this price point and a preamplifier feature that would allow you to use it to run some speakers. It's, I think this might be the real killer feature for this, but even just using this as a DAC alongside a good headphone amp like the Atom, I think this is a really, really good choice for this money. And to be quite honest, I'm frankly blown away by the value for money that I'm getting here from this topping E30. I have actually pre-ordered, I think it's a pre-order, I've ordered from Shenzhen Audio the topping L30, which is a companion amp to go with the topping E30 DAC. It's the same size and shape. It's literally designed to be a stack with the topping E30. It hasn't shipped yet. I don't have any idea when it's going to ship. I suspect probably not even till September. But when that comes along, I'll be able to pair that with this, and then we'll see if that's any good. But for my personal stack now, I'm actually going to be using the topping E30 alongside the Atom amp. And as far as I'm concerned, this might be one of the better setups that you could get for around about $200. So yeah, as far as I'm concerned, this particular little DAC gets a big thumbs up from me. Right, that's going to do it for this review. If you like this video, then don't forget to leave a like, and if you haven't already, then please consider subscribing. Thank you so much to the patrons, and if you want to support the channel, then check those links down in the description. You can also support the channel by commenting, liking, and sharing. It all helps me out a lot more than you'd think. And as always, thank you so much for watching and make it all the way to the end. And until next time, have a good one.